I want to briefly transition from accountability in the courtroom, accountability in the field, to accountability through the use of civil litigation. Survivors of the Holocaust could not speak about their experiences, and they had no access to their homes, their family, their evidence. They didn't have the photograph of their grandmother's home that had a picture on the wall that they remember in their eye. They remember seeing, but which was now hanging in a museum. How would they get it back? The United States, more than any other country in the world, took the lead in Holocaust-era asset reparations restitution through a combination of the use of legal proceedings by individual law firms who gathered together to bring litigation, to seek justice, working closely with the U.S. government, working closely with non-governmental organizations, working closely with the press, the court of public opinion. A series of cases were brought in different U.S. federal courts and also in U.S. state courts, attempting to seek justice through the court system. Cases against the Swiss banks, cases against those companies and countries that used forced and slave labor, cases against the insurance companies who sold policies but wouldn't pay on the policies because you couldn't prove that somebody was dead. You needed a death certificate. And how were you going to get a death certificate from Majdanek? Or how were you going to get a death certificate from Auschwitz? Who was to issue the certificate? The cases were settled through diplomatic negotiation, through work by such people as Stuart Eisenstadt, who worked for the U.S. government, the U.S. State Department, and passionately brought together countries and representatives and organizations from around the world to address the issue of restitution. The opposition, if you will, painted it about money. They painted it about greed. Excuse me for being bold. They painted it about Jewish greed, that the Jews want money from this country and that country. It wasn't about money. It was about justice. How do you replace a life? How do you weave back together the fiber and the fabric of the family and of a community? The millions lost of lives, not the billions of money. But some measure of accountability was achieved through the courts. In terror cases, like in hate cases, there's also been a wealth of civil litigation brought in U.S. district courts, those are federal courts, and U.S. state courts. People think it's about money. It is not about money. It is about seeking justice, seeking accountability. I had the privilege of representing American victims of Libyan terror and suing Libya and Syria for Abu Nidal acts of terror, hijackings, where the Americans and the Israelis were, after the hijacking plane landed, they were put into first class. And the Americans and the Israelis were separated. And other people are getting off the plane, one country at a time, getting their passports. And they call forward the first Israeli woman. She reaches for her passport and they put a bullet to her brain. And they shot every single American and Israeli. Some survived. We sued Libya. I found the Abu Nidal terrorist that was still alive, who actually pulled the trigger, sitting in a prison, and he agreed to see me. It was supposed to have been 18 minutes. 7 hours later, he agreed to give us a sworn affidavit that he was sponsored by Libya, trained by Syria. That affidavit, along with the affidavits of the Abu Nidal terrorists who committed the Rome and Vienna airport attacks at 9 o'clock in the morning, and 2 airports, Rome and Vienna, on the same day in December of 1985. Those 2 Abu Nidal terrorists spoke to us as well. They gave us sworn affidavits. We delivered those affidavits to the United States Department of State. They told us they were going to give them to Gaddafi, and they were going to tell Gaddafi Libya could not get off the State Department list of state sponsors of terror. Libya would not get off the State Department list of state sponsors of terror or have sanctions released and removed unless they accepted accountability. And indeed, Gaddafi wrote a check for $1.5 billion to settle all the claims of all American victims of Libyan terror. More than $50 billion of judgments are in existence today in the United States courts against the Islamic Republic of Iran. We're privileged to represent Marines blown up in Beirut on a peacekeeping mission, sponsored by Iran, committed by Hezbollah. The U.S. Supreme Court ordered the turnover of $1.9 billion of Iranian central bank funds to benefit the victims and their families. Judgments are held against Syria. Judgments have been sought or litigation pursued against banks for funding terror, some of which have been settled. In the 9/11 cases, it's now possible in the United States to sue for an act of international terror committed in the United States, not only for acts of international terror committed abroad. I conclude with this. We cannot be silent. We lawyers, if we have nothing else, we have our hearts. It doesn't matter how little we may have learned in law school. What matters is that we have the ability to make a difference. We have the ability to change in a legal venue. It requires, however, in my judgment, a confluence of effort. That we have the ability, a confluence of effort, working with the courts, working with the victims, working cooperatively with other lawyers, working with in my country, the State Department, working with intelligence officers, former intelligence officers to help gather the evidence, working with the court of public opinion, and sharing our hearts, our minds, our hands, our feet, our brains, and our love and compassion for justice with the world, because together, not only in the United States, but in every single court in every single country, you can see to it laws are created, cases are brought. You may lose this one or this one or this one, but every single one is an effort at seeking justice. And justice means accountability. On behalf of the March of the Living, on behalf of the Miller Center, on behalf of Rutgers Law School, on behalf of all of the organizations that are here, on behalf of the Bar Association, on behalf of all of those who care, I want to thank you for joining us as we now transition to the final session It has been my privilege to be with you, and I thank you all for your service.